Hey everybody, it's Sarah Whiting, Executive Director of St. John's Church Foundation here in Richmond, Virginia. It is a hot day in the graveyard, but I am here to give you another vlog, histories and stories of St. John's Church. St. John's Church is a National Historic Landmark in recognition of being the place where Patrick Henry gave his Liberty or Death speech on March 23rd, 1775 at the Second Virginia Convention. And that speech is what sparked the American Revolution. Now, speaking of revolutions, this Tuesday on July 14th, it'll be Bastille Day. And in recognition of Bastille Day and our French friends who helped us win this revolution, the Marquis de Lafayette will be here at St. John's Church this Saturday. Now, since we're closed, you won't be able to come here to visit him, but you'll be able to see him in the virtual realm. So if you click on this link below, you can get tickets to visit with him online. And he's a fascinating person and will be here to tell you everything about his life. So we hope you can join us. So today I'm going to continue that French connection and tell you a little bit about Mr. Didier Collin. Mr. Collin is buried right here. This is his tombstone, and it gives us a little bit, some basic information about him. He was born in Paris, and you'll see it here, lowercase P-A-R-I-C-E, Paris. We'll talk about that later. But he was born in Paris on the 10th of April, 1759. He was a wig maker and a barber, and we don't know much about his early life, but we do know he came to Richmond here by 1787. Now, how do we know that? Because he placed an ad in the Virginia Independent newspaper in February of 1787, where he was trying to find a runaway enslaved apprentice. And the ad reads in part, $10 reward for Peter Viaux, V-I-A-U-X. I might be pronouncing that incorrectly, but it reads, $10 reward Peter Viaux, a French boy about 5 feet high, of a dark complexion, and can speak the English language very well. I have been informed that he has followed Mr. Hanna, who lately kept the EO table in the city, and has gone afterwards to Alexandria, and it's signed Didier Collin. Unfortunately, we don't know anything about young Peter, how old he was, his story, other than he was an enslaved apprentice in Mr. Collin's wig and barber shop. But the ads tells us that he was following Mr. Hanna to Alexandria, and my guess would be that he possibly had family members in Alexandria, and he was trying to get to them. And that is so sad because we don't have a record about what happened to Peter, and we don't know his connection to this Mr. Hanna. And in the ad, it references Mr. Hanna, who lately kept the EO table. And you may be wondering, what the heck is an EO table? Well, it's gambling. And EO stands for even odd. It's basically like a roulette game. It has a wheel and a ball, just like roulette, but instead of numbers, there are even spaces and odd spaces. Now, you may recall in my last vlog when I talked about George Wythe and him being murdered by his nephew, George Wythe Sweeney. You'll remember I talked about Sweeney having a huge gambling problem and that he racked up debts, which motivated his murdering his uncle. And during that time in Richmond, in the 1790s and the 1800s, gambling was a huge problem here. Richmond was full of taverns, gambling tables, plenty of casinos and bars were all over town. And it's interesting that this gambling problem in Richmond can be seen in this unfortunate advertisement for young Peter, in Mr. Collin's advertisement to seek his enslaved apprentice by referring to an EO table. And so anybody reading that ad would know what an EO table was, gambling, and perhaps they even knew Mr. Hanna. Now, besides gambling, Richmond had a big problem at that time also. Prostitution was a problem. And in the 1780s, you know that Richmond became the capital of Virginia. It had moved from Williamsburg, and Richmond was a hopping place in the 1780s and 90s. It was the place of government. It was a place of commerce. It was a riverport city. In fact, just that way down the hill was the Butterfly. It was the port of rockets, and so that, you can imagine, is going to be full of sailors coming back from sea. And in 1806, court records talk about dozens of houses of ill repute being here in the city. But since I'm telling the story in a churchyard, I'm just going to let you all imagine and fill in the gaps about Richmond, what it must have been like during that time. Now, during this boom time in Richmond, in 1792, our Mr. Collin here purchased 19 acres of land on a hillside and uses part of that land to open an amusement park, which is aptly called French Garden Hill. And French Garden Hill is located to the north end of 8th and 10th Streets and overlooks Shockoe Valley. And you can still see this name French Garden Hill used today. Now, Mr. Collin's amusement park was open to the public, open to Richmonders, and it was full of fruit trees and flowers, and it was a recreational spot for Richmonders. Now, the next record we see of Mr. Collin is on June 16th, 1795, when he gets married. He marries Catherine Naigler, and that's spelled N-A-I-G-L-E-Y, in Henrico County. And all I could find about Catherine was that she was born in 1776 in Pennsylvania, and so she was about 19 when she married Mr. Collin, who was 36 at the time. And they would go on to have 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. And clearly we can see Mr. Collin is buried here at St. John's Church, but we don't know where Mrs. Collin is buried. I don't have a record of that, and like I said, I don't know when she died. So she perhaps could be here, we just are not sure. We do know that some of her children went on to be buried at Shockoe Hill Cemetery and Riverview Cemetery. Now, we can only speculate that Mr. Collin's wig and barbershop business did pretty well. I don't have any records, but knowing that Richmond was the seat of the government at this time and that it was a booming town, I'm going to assume that he did pretty well, because wig makers were completely sought after they were necessary for judges, attorneys, and rich people, and Richmond was an affluent city. Now, wig makers made wigs were called perukes at the time, and they also made queues. Queues were like the extensions of the day. They could attach and hang from the back of the head. They were cheaper than the perukes or the wigs. And wigs were made, or could be made, from animal hair, yak, horsehair, goat, and the more expensive wigs were made of human hair. So when the courts were in session, wig makers were kept very busy by the judges and attorneys creating their specialized wigs. And I like to think that perhaps maybe Mr. Collin made a wig for our George Wythe. Who knows? We can only imagine. Wig makers not only created new wigs, but they also maintained them, and wigs require a lot of upkeep. And boy, do we know a lot about wig upkeep here at St. John's Church. We still use wig makers and dressers here at St. John's Church to help our actors look good for our Liberty or Death reenactments. And just here's one of the many wigs that we own here at St. John's Church. So, I mean, I understand when they talk about it was a social status. These are expensive. These were costly to maintain. But I just couldn't let a conversation about a Richmond wig maker go by without showing one of our own wigs. And you know what? If you're interested in learning more about colonial wigs and what a wig shop looked like, we encourage you to reach out to our friends at Colonial Williamsburg. They've got a wig maker shop. I'm not sure if they're open right now, but you should check into that. Now, the first step to having your custom wig made was to get your head shaved or get your hair cut very short. And that was for women and men, by the way. And children as well had their heads cut their hair cut very short or their head shaved. And kids were running around with wigs. Affluent children had wigs even as young as 7 years old. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because the next time we hear about Mr. Collin or have a record of him is when he puts another ad in a paper. This is the Virginia Gazette and General Advertiser, the Richmond paper, in November of 1796. Again, he's seeking information and providing an award for a runaway enslaved apprentice. Now, in this ad, Mr. Collin is seeking Stephen, who is about 15 years old, and the ad in part reads, "He's about 15 years old, thick and stout made, his hair was straight and light of color, but was not above a half-inch long, having been shaved about 3 weeks ago. He wore a wig when he went off, the hair of which was of different color." And as to his clothes, I need not describe them, for he generally swaps them when he runs away, to which he has been accustomed ever since he was 8 years old. His mother belongs to a Mr. Jacob Tyrrell, living on New River in the state of North Carolina, where I expect he will endeavor to go, or else towards northward. He is by trade a barber, but will endeavor to pass for some other trade or a cabin boy. This is so sad. And this is obviously something inconceivable to us. This poor child has been running away to find his mother ever since he was 8 years old, which is incredibly young. I mean, it's astounding. In this ad, like all the other ads that are about people seeking their enslaved workers, are just a tragic and stark reminder to the racial views of the time. And I did find this ad through an amazing historic resource. There's a website called Geography of Slavery in Virginia, and it is a digital collection of advertisements for runaway and captured enslaved people. They take these from 18th and 19th century newspapers. We'll put the link down below, but it's an incredible resource to learn more and to do research. Unfortunately, like Peter before, I don't have any information about what happened to him or if he made it to his mother. I sure hope he did, but I just don't have the end of that story. Now, the trail runs cold on Mr. Collin, and I couldn't find any records. However, we're lucky enough that we have his tombstone, and we do know that he died here in Richmond on April 3rd, 1806. We know he doesn't leave a will because from other newspaper ads, we see that his wife, Catherine, is in charge of settling his estate. And she puts a series of ads in the Virginia Argus right after he dies in May of 1806, asking people to submit their claims if they have any on the estate. And then later that month, on May 30th, there's an ad in the Virginia Argus as well. It's an auction at their house. And the ad describes household furniture, beds, table, chairs, and barber shop tools are to be sold. And so that's where the trail ends for Mr. Collin. But his grave marker has an amazing story to tell in its own right. And that's the story of early American grave markers. Now, Mr. Collin's grave marker is thick. It's about that thick. It's a very thick sandstone marker. It's very simple. It has a nice plain tympanum in the middle with these high shoulders on either side. It's what I call a no-nonsense grave marker. There's no other information other than birth, death, date. There's no verse. There's no long epitaph. And it reads, "This head and footstone is to the memory of Didier Collin, who was born in Paris," again lowercase Parice, "on the 10th of April in the year of our Lord 1759, who departed this life the 3rd of April of the year of our Lord 1806. Now, this marker has some amazing examples of characteristics that you'll see on early American gravestones. The first thing is, let's talk about spelling. I keep referring to this Parice for Paris. It's a wonderful example of what you'll typically see on early gravestone markers. You know, unusual spelling, antiquated spelling, or just downright funny spelling is not unusual at all. And sometimes the spelling can be due to style changes. Let's say the word instead of lie or here lies, instead of L-I-E-S, it could be spelled L-Y-E-S. But also, spelling mistakes could be just that. You know, phonetic spelling was not unusual, and it wasn't so much that the population was uneducated, it was more about colonists' point of view of spelling. If you could read it, that was fine. And in this case, we know that's Paris. You can read it. It's phonetic. It works. Now, another reason for misspellings, besides that phonetic spelling, was that the English language wasn't standardized at that point. The first dictionary in the U.S. was not published until 1788, and the first American written dictionary by Noah Webster wasn't published in America until 1806, which is incidentally the year Mr. Collin died. So spelling mistakes, weird capitalizations, those are just par for the course if you look at early American grave markers. Now, another thing that early American grave markers share in common is I call it wonky, their weird layout. Sometimes the overall appearance in the inscriptions may seem, maybe it's not straight across. Often the grave, the tombstone carvers would carve in little guidelines to help keep the words and the lettering straight across. I don't see guidelines carved here, and actually this tombstone carver did a pretty good job. This is pretty straight, by the way. If we do seem off, it's because the ground is uneven here. Don't blame the tombstone carver. But like spelling, layout and having a meticulously laid out lettering was not the point. It was not a priority, let's say. And ultimately, the wonky layouts show up on the right side. It's kind of like all the mistakes roll to the right in my thinking. And these are perfect examples. He doesn't quite get the layout straight, and so when he ends up here with year, the R is put right up at the top, and same down here. So 3 of April in the year, and a little R is put right there. And I think it's interesting here how there's this giant space between of our Lord. Anyway, like spelling, not a priority. If you could read it, that was good. We also need to remember that a lot of these tombstone carvers were not professionals. They were doing this as a second job, or their just level of skill and education wasn't standardized, so you got what you got. But this is a beautiful marker, and I think this tombstone carver did a great job. What I love about these early American grave markers is they're completely individual, just kind of like the people that they memorialize. And they're works of art in themselves, and that's what I love about them. Now, Mr. Collins' grave marker was recently restored in our Adopt a Grave program. You can see this little patch here. This is patched with Jan mortar. This grave marker was falling apart, and water was getting in it, so now it's been patched. And if you'd like to learn more about our Adopt a Grave program, we encourage you to check it out. We'll put a link below. We've restored over 18 grave markers through this program, and we really appreciate everybody who's helped us out. By restoring these grave markers, we're able to tell the story of Richmond. So I hope you've enjoyed this vlog today. Oh, it's such a hot day. Oh my gosh. And if you would like to learn more about what we do here at St. John's Church Foundation, I encourage you to check out our YouTube channel and see our other interviews and stories about the graveyard. And before I forget, we still have our Graveyard Nerd t-shirts for sale, and the link will be down below. When you buy a t-shirt, you help us out while we're closed to COVID-19. So happy Bastille Day, and thank you so much. Bye-bye.